The truck had stopped burning, but the dog had not stopped waiting. By the time Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker saw the smoke, the rain had already begun to fall, soft at first, then harder, tapping against the windshield of his old Ford like impatient fingers. He was 20 miles outside Asheville, North Carolina, on a narrow two-lane road that twisted through dark pines and low mountain fog. The afternoon sky had gone the color of cold steel. No houses, no gas stations, no headlights behind him, just wet asphalt, black trees, and a column of gray smoke rising beyond the next bend. Ethan slowed without thinking. Years in the Marine Corps had taught him that smoke in the wrong place was never just smoke. When he rounded the curve, he saw the truck. It rested crooked in a shallow ditch, half turned toward the woods, its front end blackened and hollow. The windshield was gone. Rain hissed against the scorched hood. Thin ribbons of steam curled from the engine and drifted across the road, carrying the bitter smell of burned rubber, wet ash, and gasoline. Ethan eased his pickup onto the shoulder and killed the engine. For 1 second, he sat with both hands on the wheel. Something in him wanted to keep driving. He had somewhere to be before dark, somewhere he had avoided for 6 years. But then movement appeared near the rear of the wreck. A German shepherd stood beside the burned-out truck. Male, full-grown, sable coat darkened by rain and soot. One ear bent slightly at the tip. His front right paw hovered just above the ground, too sore to bear his weight, yet he held himself upright with the rigid discipline of a sentry. He was not wandering. He was not searching for food. He was standing guard. Ethan opened the door and stepped into the rain. Cold water struck his face and ran beneath the collar of his field jacket. The dog turned toward him at once. Amber eyes. Alert, steady, exhausted. There was no panic in them. That unsettled Ethan more than fear would have. "Easy boy," he said. His voice came low, almost lost beneath the rain. The shepherd did not growl. He did not retreat. He lowered his head and placed something on the pavement between them. A child's red mitten, small enough to fit in Ethan's palm. One side was streaked with soot. The dog looked at the mitten, then back at the truck. Ethan felt the air change inside his chest. Someone still in there? The shepherd turned away before Ethan finished the question. He limped to the rear passenger's side and stopped beside a warped metal door. Then he raised his injured paw and struck it 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was faint against the rain, but deliberate. Ethan stepped closer. Heat still breathed from the wreck in weak, uneven waves. He could hear water dripping through broken glass, metal ticking as it cooled. Somewhere deep in the trees, thunder rolled over the ridge. "Back up," Ethan said. The dog glanced at him, but did not move. Ethan tried again, sharper this time. "Back." The shepherd took exactly 2 steps away and sat. Not like a stray, like a trained K9 responding to command. Ethan noticed the collar then, nearly hidden beneath wet fur. Black nylon, scarred by heat. No tag, no name. But the stitching was military grade, and the brass buckle bore the worn imprint of years of use. Ethan crouched near the rear door, careful not to touch the hottest parts of the frame. The window had collapsed inward, leaving a jagged opening no wider than his forearm. Beyond it, everything was dark. He called into the truck. "This is Ethan Walker. Can you hear me?" No answer. He listened. Rainwater ran along the roof and spilled through the broken window in silver threads. The dog rose behind him, breathing hard. "Can you hear me?" Ethan called again. Still nothing. He reached for his phone. 1 bar appeared, then vanished. He tried 911 anyway. The call failed before it rang. The mountain road felt suddenly farther from civilization than it had a minute before. Ethan walked around the wreck, studying every angle. The driver's door hung open. The front seat was empty. The dashboard had melted into a dark, twisted shape. On the rear floor, he saw the metal base of a child safety seat, but no child. The sight should have brought relief. Instead, it tightened something behind his ribs. He checked the roadside and the tree line. No footprints remained in the mud except the dog's. No voice called from the woods. No figure moved between the pines. The shepherd followed at a distance, limping, watching Ethan with quiet urgency. Ethan returned to the rear door. "Show me." The dog stepped forward immediately. He placed his nose against the lower panel, near the floorboard, then looked up at Ethan. Again, 3 taps with the paw. Tap, tap, tap. Ethan held his breath. For a moment, There was only rain. Then, from somewhere inside the blackened truck, something answered. 3 faint knocks. Slow, weak, but unmistakable. Ethan's eyes locked on the dogs. The shepherd did not bark. He simply stood there, soaked and trembling, as if he had carried that sound alone for miles and had finally found someone willing to hear it. 10 minutes earlier, Ethan Walker had almost driven past the smoke. The thought stayed with him now, sharp and unwelcome, while the 3 faint knocks trembled through the ruined truck. He looked at the German shepherd, then at the dark opening in the rear door, and understood how close he had come to leaving both of them alone. Before the bend, before the scorched metal and the red mitten, the road had been empty enough to make forgetting feel possible. Ethan had been driving north with the heater low and the radio turned off, following a route he had not taken in 6 years. In the passenger seat rested a folded Marine Corps dress uniform beneath a clear garment bag. On top of it lay a small white envelope with the name Ryan Miller written across the front in Ethan's careful block lettering. The envelope had never been mailed. He had rewritten the letter 7 times and destroyed every version except the last. None of them had contained the words he truly needed to say. Ryan should have been the one coming home. Ryan should have been the one growing older, complaining about his knees, teaching a child how to cast a fishing line, standing beside a backyard grill on a warm Sunday afternoon. Ethan had been given those years instead, and he had never decided whether they were a gift or a debt. The memorial service was scheduled for 5 o'clock at a small veterans cemetery outside Asheville. Ryan's family had invited him. Every year, Ethan found a reason not to go. A training assignment, a medical appointment, bad weather. This year, there had been no excuse left that did not sound like fear. So he drove through the rain, carrying the uniform and the letter, telling himself that arriving late was still better than never arriving at all. When he first saw the smoke beyond the trees, he had eased his foot from the gas. Only for a moment. The road was narrow, the weather was worsening, and the old clock on the dashboard told him he had less than an hour before the service began. He had already spent 6 years disappointing a dead man. He could not bear to disappoint him again. Ethan passed the turnoff. The smoke disappeared behind him. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. Then a shape stepped into the road in his rearview mirror. The German shepherd emerged from the fog with one paw lifted, his dark coat slick with rain. He did not chase the truck. He did not bark. He simply moved to the center line and stood there, watching the red taillights carry Ethan away. There was something in the dog's stillness that reached through distance. It was not helplessness. It was an order. Stop. Ethan drove another 100 yards before pressing the brake. Gravel cracked beneath the tires as he turned around. Now, kneeling beside the burned truck, he could still see that image in his mind. The shepherd in the rain. Alone, but refusing to surrender the road. Ethan placed one hand against the cool edge of the lower door panel and leaned closer. I hear you, he called. Stay with me. No answer came this time. The dog moved beside him and pressed his nose to the same section of metal. His body trembled, not from fear, Ethan realized, but from exhaustion. A thin line of rainwater ran from the shepherd's forehead to the end of his muzzle. He had soot around his eyes and a small burned patch along one shoulder, yet he kept his attention fixed on the person inside. Ethan touched the collar carefully. The dog stiffened, then allowed it. Beneath the wet nylon, Ethan found no identification tag, only a narrow strip of faded stitching and the outline where a metal plate had once been. Attached. He ran his thumb over the buckle. The construction was familiar. Reinforced webbing. Quick-release clasp. The kind used for working dogs trained to move through noise, confusion, and danger without losing focus. You are not somebody's backyard pet, are you? Ethan whispered. The shepherd looked at him, then lowered himself to the ground near the rear wheel. Not resting. Listening. Ethan walked toward the front of the truck and examined the open driver's door again. The seat belt hung loose. A set of keys remained in the ignition, blackened but still visible. On the floorboard lay a paper coffee cup and a child's coloring book swollen with rain. He reached through the doorway and lifted the book by one corner. Most of the pages had blurred into blue and purple stains, but one drawing remained clear enough to recognize. A little girl had drawn a tall man in a green uniform beside a German shepherd under a yellow sun. Above them, in uneven letters, she had written, "My heroes." Ethan stared at the words longer than he meant to. Thunder moved closer. The air carried a faint chemical smell from beneath the hood, and somewhere under the truck, liquid dripped steadily onto the wet gravel. He returned to the shepherd. "We do this carefully," he said. The dog rose at once. Ethan tried his phone again. One bar appeared. He dialed 911 and lifted the phone high, turning toward the open road. The call connected for half a second. A woman's voice broke through in fragments, asking for his location. Ethan gave the highway number and the nearest mile marker, but the signal vanished before she confirmed she had heard him. He looked toward the sky, then back at the wreck. Waiting for help might be the safe choice. It might also be the choice that came too late. The shepherd limped to Ethan's side and touched the back of his hand with a cold nose. It was a small gesture, almost gentle. Then the dog stepped toward the truck and looked back. Ethan folded the wet coloring book and slipped it inside his jacket. "All right," he said. "You found me. Now show me exactly where they are." The shepherd turned, moved past the warped rear door, and lowered his nose toward the underside of the truck. He paused near the rear axle, where the body had folded inward from the impact. Then he lay flat in the rain and stretched one paw beneath the chassis. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him. From that angle, he saw what the darkness had hidden before. Behind the bent frame was a narrow metal seam, too straight to be part of the truck's ordinary floor. A separate compartment, a space sealed beneath the cargo bed. Ethan pressed his ear close to the cold steel. At first he heard only rain and the strained breathing of the dog beside him. Then, from deep within the hidden space, came a sound softer than the knocks. A child drawing one shallow breath. Ethan kept his ear against the metal and listened again. The breath came once more, faint and uneven, then disappeared beneath the rain. He shifted closer to the seam and called out, "You are not alone. My name is Ethan. I am going to get you out." For a few seconds, nothing answered. Then 3 soft taps came from inside. The German shepherd lifted his head at once. His ears moved forward. He looked at Ethan, then struck the ground 3 times with his paw. Tap, tap, tap. Ethan studied him. "That is your signal." The dog held his gaze. Ethan knew working animals communicated through patterns most people never noticed. A change in posture, a pause before movement, a repeated gesture meant for one trained set of eyes. This dog was not acting from panic. He was passing information. Ethan pointed toward the road. "Search." The shepherd turned immediately, limping around the truck with his nose low. He checked the open driver's door, the wet grass beside the ditch, and the line of trees beyond the shoulder. He moved carefully, conserving strength, but every step had purpose. He found no one. When he returned, he sat beside the hidden compartment and looked at Ethan. The message was clear. The person inside was the only one left here. Ethan removed his jacket and folded it beneath his knees. The pavement was cold enough to numb his hands. He brushed mud away from the seam and followed it along the underside of the cargo bed. The compartment was about 4 feet long and less than 2 feet high. It looked like a custom storage space, insulated and sealed behind a reinforced panel. One corner had buckled inward. The latch was hidden beyond a strip of warped steel. He searched the roadside for something he could use and found a broken tire iron half buried near the ditch. The shepherd watched every movement. "I need you back," Ethan said. The dog remained still. Ethan pointed toward the shoulder. "Back." This time the shepherd obeyed, but only by a few feet. He lowered himself near the red mitten and kept his eyes fixed on the compartment. Ethan wedged the tire iron into the seam. The metal resisted. He adjusted his grip and pulled again. A low groan passed through the truck. The dog rose. Ethan stopped. He listened for movement inside. "Are you still with me?" A small sound answered. Not a word. More like a breath trying to become one. Ethan pressed closer. "Can you tell me your name?" Silence. Then a child's voice, thin and uncertain, slipped through the metal. "Ranger." Ethan looked toward the German shepherd. The dog was already standing. His body had gone still. "Ranger is here," Ethan said. The shepherd stepped forward at the sound of his name. He placed his nose against the panel and released a low whine, the first sound Ethan had heard from him. Inside the compartment, the child breathed faster. "Ranger?" she whispered again. Ethan felt something tighten in his throat. He found help. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. The rain softened for a moment, leaving only the ticking of the truck and the distant roll of thunder. Ethan returned the tire iron to the seam. "Listen to me. I am going to make some noise." It might feel frightening, but Ranger is staying right beside you. The dog lowered himself near the panel as if he understood every word. Ethan pulled. The metal shifted less than an inch. A narrow line of cool air moved through the opening. From within came a cough, then another. That is good, Ethan said. Keep breathing. We are getting closer. He tried the emergency call again. This time the signal held long enough for a dispatcher to answer. Ethan gave the highway number, the nearest mile marker, and the condition of the truck. The woman asked if he could wait for responders. Ethan looked at the bent compartment, then at the dark fluid gathering beneath the front end. Send everyone you can, he said. But I am not waiting to open this. The connection broke. Ethan set the phone on the pavement with the speaker turned up in case the call returned. He moved to the other side of the latch and found a small gap beneath a melted strip of rubber. When he reached into it, his fingers touched fabric. He pulled gently and brought out the corner of a blue backpack strap. Sewn into the cloth was a white name label, darkened by soot but still readable. Lily Miller. Ethan stopped breathing for one long second. Miller. The name carried him 6 years backward to a dry morning overseas, to a man with an easy smile and a habit of humming old country songs before sunrise. Corporal Ryan Miller. The friend Ethan had been driving to remember. The man whose family he had avoided because grief had made cowardice look like respect. Ranger rose and came closer. Ethan looked at the dog's collar, at the military stitching, at the way he responded to commands from Ethan's old world. Who trained you? Ethan whispered. Ranger touched the backpack strap with his nose. Then he looked toward the hidden compartment. The question could wait. The child could not. The first siren reached them as a thin sound beyond the trees, then grew louder until red light began to pulse against the wet trunks. Ethan stayed beside the hidden compartment, one hand pressed near the seam, speaking to Lily whenever the rain grew too loud. Ranger is still here, he told her. So am I. Her replies had become shorter. Sometimes she answered with a tap, sometimes only with a breath. Ranger remained close enough for his shoulder to touch the truck, though his injured paw shook whenever he shifted his weight. The fire engine rounded the bend first, followed by a county rescue truck and a patrol vehicle. 4 responders stepped into the rain. Their boots splashed through the runoff as they carried equipment toward the wreck. A broad man in a yellow turnout coat introduced himself as Captain Daniel Harris. His face was calm, but his eyes moved quickly over the blackened cab, the open fuel line, and the bent cargo frame. You the caller? He asked. Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker. There is a child inside a compartment under the cargo bed. Harris crouched beside the seam and aimed a thermal scanner toward the metal. The small screen showed cold blue shapes and fading patches of warmth from the burned frame. He adjusted the angle. Nothing appeared where Lily was trapped. I do not have a heat signature, he said. Ethan looked at the panel. She spoke to me. Harris scanned again, slower this time. This insulation may be blocking the reading. A younger firefighter placed his ear near the seam. Metal clicked somewhere inside the truck. He listened, then sat back. Could be the frame cooling. Ranger stood abruptly. A low sound formed in his chest, not threatening, but firm. Ethan put a hand near the dog's collar. Easy. Harris studied Ranger. He trained. Yes. I do not know by whom, but he is signaling this compartment. The captain looked toward the road, where rainwater streamed past the tires in narrow rivers. We need to stabilize the truck before we cut anything. It is sitting on soft ground, and the rear frame is under pressure. He turned to his crew. Chock the wheels. Bring the spreader and the cribbing. The responders moved with practiced speed. Wooden blocks were placed near the tires. A steel cable was carried from the rescue truck toward the rear axle. The moment it touched the wreck, Ranger stepped between the cable and the compartment. His ears flattened. He did not bark. He simply refused to move. Ranger, Ethan said. The dog glanced at him, but stayed in place. One of the firefighters approached slowly. Come on, buddy. We need you clear. Ranger lowered his body over the seam. Rain ran from his back in dark lines. Harris frowned and looked at Ethan. If we pull against the frame, could it compress the compartment? Ethan asked. Harris followed the cable with his eyes. It could shift the cargo bed. We are trying to prevent that. Ranger tapped the metal 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Everyone stopped. For one breath, the road went quiet. Then something answered from below. 3 weak. Knocks. The younger firefighter looked at Harris. That was not cooling metal. Harris dropped to one knee. "Lily, my name is Daniel. We are here to help you." No voice came back. Only a faint scrape. Harris stood and changed his tone. "Remove the cable. We stabilize by hand. No pulling." The crew obeyed at once. They placed more blocks beneath the frame and slid inflatable lifting bags under the safer side of the truck. Ethan stayed beside Ranger while the rescuers worked. The dog's breathing had grown shallow. When Ethan touched his ribs, he felt them rise too quickly beneath the wet fur. "You did your part," Ethan whispered. Ranger looked toward the compartment, unwilling to accept the idea that his part could end before Lily was free. A paramedic named Grace Collins knelt beside the dog and opened a medical pack. "He needs attention." "Not yet," Ethan said. "He will not leave her." Grace examined the burned patch along Ranger's shoulder without forcing him to move. She wrapped his injured paw loosely and placed a foil blanket over his back. Ranger endured it, eyes fixed on the truck. Harris returned with the hydraulic spreader. "The latch is buried behind the bent panel. We can open it, but once we start, the frame may settle." Ethan looked under the cargo bed. The narrow seam seemed smaller now. Rain had mixed with soot and gathered along the edge like black tears. "How long?" "A few minutes if the metal cooperates." "And if it does not?" Harris did not answer. He did not need to. The paramedic moved closer to the seam and called Lily's name. No response. She tried again. Still nothing. Ethan lowered himself until his cheek nearly touched the pavement. "Lily, listen to me. Ranger found me on the road. He stood in the rain until I turned around. He has not left you for 1 second. You do not leave him now." For a moment, only the hiss of the rain answered. Then a tiny sound came through the metal. One tap. Ranger lifted his head. Ethan closed his eyes and let out the breath he had been holding. Harris positioned the spreader against the warped panel. "Everyone ready?" The crew braced the frame. Ethan wrapped one arm around Ranger's chest and pulled him back, just far enough to keep him safe. The machine began to press. Metal groaned. The compartment shifted less than an inch. Then the entire truck gave a low, heavy creak and moved toward the ditch. The truck shifted no more than 2 inches, but every person around it felt the movement through the pavement. Captain Harris raised one hand. The hydraulic spreader stopped at once. For a second, no one spoke. Rain tapped against helmets, metal, and the silver emergency blanket draped across Ranger's back. Beneath the cargo bed, one of the wooden supports had tilted in the mud. The right rear tire had sunk deeper into the shoulder, pulling the frame toward the ditch. Harris crouched beside the support and studied the angle. "We cannot force the door from this position," he said. "The weight is transferring onto the compartment." Ethan looked toward the narrow seam. "Then we change the position. That takes time. She does not have much." Harris met his eyes. There was no disagreement in his face, only calculation. He turned to the crew. "Reset the cribbing. Bring the low-pressure bags around the uphill side. Slow movements only." The firefighters worked without wasting a word. They slid broad wooden blocks beneath the truck and fed 2 flat lifting bags into the space near the axle. A compressor started with a low mechanical hum. As the bags filled, the truck rose by fractions of an inch. Mud released its grip with a wet sucking sound. Ranger tried to stand, but his wrapped paw folded beneath him. Ethan caught him under the chest before he fell. "Stay with me," Ethan murmured. The dog did not look at him. His eyes remained fixed on the black seam. Grace Collins moved closer and checked the dog's breathing again. He is running on willpower now. Ethan knew the feeling. He had seen men keep moving after strength had already left them, held upright by nothing more than the knowledge that someone else was counting on them. Ranger was doing the same. "Can you give him something?" Ethan asked. "Fluids, yes. Anything stronger might make him too unsteady." Grace prepared a small line and worked gently while Ethan kept one hand against the dog's neck. Ranger barely reacted. The moment Grace finished, he leaned forward again, stretching his nose toward Lily. Captain Harris signaled for the compressor to stop. The cargo bed had lifted just enough to expose the damaged latch. It was buried behind a strip of bent aluminum and a layer of melted insulation. "There," Ethan said. Harris nodded. "We can reach it now." The younger firefighter brought a compact saw, but Harris shook his head after examining the fuel line. No sparks. He chose a manual pry bar instead and wedged it into the softened edge of the panel. Ethan lowered himself beside the opening. "Lily, they found the latch." There was no reply. He tried again. You told me Ranger's name. Now I need you to tell me yours. Silence held for several long seconds. Then a whisper came through the seam. Lily. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. That is a good name. Is he okay? He is right here. Ranger released a faint whine as if answering for himself. The sound was so soft that everyone nearby became still to hear it. Inside the compartment, Lily gave a small cough. He came back, she said. Ethan looked at the dog. Yes, he did. Harris worked the pry bar deeper. The panel shifted, then stopped. The latch is twisted, he said. We need another angle. Ethan moved toward the underside of the truck and saw a gap no wider than his hand. Through it, he could make out pale fabric and the edge of a blue backpack. Lily was close, but the compartment narrowed around her like a sealed box. The door opens downward, Ethan said. If we release it, the weight could drop onto the ground. Harris nodded. We need to support it first. A firefighter slid a rescue cushion beneath the panel. Another positioned a short hydraulic ram against the frame, using only enough pressure to keep the opening steady. The rain began to fall harder, filling the ditch and darkening the roadside. Water ran beneath Ethan's palms as he reached toward the seam. Lily, when the door moves, do not pull away. Stay still until you hear my voice. I am scared. Her words were barely more than air. Ethan glanced at Ranger. The dog had lowered his head onto his paws, but his eyes were still open. So is Ranger, Ethan said. He stayed anyway. A quiet pause followed. I can stay, Lily whispered. Harris looked at Ethan. We are ready. Ethan placed one hand near the opening. Ranger lifted his head again. On 3, Harris said. 1, 2, 3. The pry bar moved. The twisted latch gave with a dull click. The panel dropped half an inch onto the rescue cushion, releasing a breath of trapped air that smelled of smoke, damp fabric, and plastic. Lily coughed from inside. Good, Ethan said. That is good. Keep breathing. Harris widened the gap slowly, using the ram to hold the frame. Through the opening, Ethan saw a small hand clutching the strap of the blue backpack. He reached in, but stopped before touching her. Lily, can you feel my hand? Her fingers moved toward his voice and found his. They were cold, but they tightened around him. I have you, Ethan said. Behind him, Ranger forced himself to his feet. The truck groaned again, deeper this time. The uphill lifting bag shifted in the mud. Harris looked toward the axle, then back at Ethan. We have less than a minute before we lose this position. Ethan tightened his grip around Lily's hand. Then we do not waste a second. Ethan kept hold of Lily's hand, while Captain Harris widened the opening another inch. The bent panel pressed against the rescue cushion, trembling under the weight of the truck. Lily, I need to know what is holding you, Ethan said. Her answer came through a cough. The belt. He lowered his shoulder closer to the ground and looked through the gap. A seat belt crossed her waist and disappeared beneath a folded blanket. The buckle sat beyond his reach, trapped under the twisted frame. Can you press the red button? He asked. Lily's fingers moved in the darkness. It will not move. Captain Harris checked the lifting bag. 30 seconds, maybe less. Ethan looked toward the firefighters. I need a belt cutter. Grace Collins placed one in his palm. The gap was too narrow for his arm and the tool together. Harris pushed the spreader carefully. Metal groaned. The opening widened just enough. That is all we have, he said. Ethan slid his arm inside. The compartment was colder than he expected, insulated from the remaining heat, but thick with stale smoke. His fingertips found the blanket, then the belt. Lily's small hand still held his wrist. Do not let go, she whispered. I will not. He followed the belt toward the buckle, but the webbing had twisted beneath a metal brace. He could not see the blade. He could only feel his way forward. Behind him, Ranger struggled upright. The silver blanket fell from his back. Grace reached for him, but he moved past her and lowered himself beside the opening. Ranger, stay back, Ethan said. The dog ignored the command for the first time. He pressed his nose into the gap and released a soft sound. Lily turned toward him. Ranger. Her voice gained the smallest trace of strength. The truck shifted again. One of the wooden blocks slid half an inch through the mud. Harris called for the crew to brace the frame. Ethan felt the compartment tighten around his arm. We need to pull you out now, he told Lily. The belt is stuck. I know. I am going to cut it. When it releases, keep your arms close and let me guide you. He positioned the cutter beneath the strap. The first pull met resistance. The webbing was thick and damp. He tried again. The belt began to fray. Ranger pushed his muzzle farther into the opening, close enough for Lily to touch him. Her fingers found the fur above his nose. "Good boy," she whispered. The shepherd closed his eyes for 1 second, as if those 2 words had reached a place deeper than pain. Ethan pulled the cutter a 3rd time. The belt separated. Lily shifted forward, but something caught behind her. "My backpack," she said. "Leave it." "I cannot." Her voice cracked. "It is my dad's." Ethan looked through the narrow opening. The blue backpack strap was looped around a bent piece of frame near her shoulder. He remembered the name label. Lily Miller. He remembered the envelope in his truck and the memorial he had been trying to reach. "I will get it," he said. "You come first." Lily hesitated. Ranger nudged her hand. Then she released the strap. Ethan reached farther into the compartment and drew her toward the opening. She was small, wrapped in the soot-darkened blanket, her hair damp against her face. Captain Harris and Grace moved into position. "Easy," Harris said. "Support her neck and shoulders." Ethan guided Lily forward inch by inch. The metal edge caught the blanket, and Ranger took the fabric gently between his teeth, pulling just enough to free it. "That is it," Ethan said. "Keep coming." The lifting bag shifted again. Air hissed from one of its valves. The rear of the truck lowered slightly. Harris raised his voice. "Now, Ethan." Ethan slid both arms beneath Lily and pulled her clear as the firefighters steadied the panel. Grace received the child and moved her onto a dry rescue blanket several feet away. Ranger followed, but when Lily's backpack remained inside, he turned back toward the opening. "No," Ethan said. Ranger paused. The dog looked at him, then at Lily. She lay beneath the shelter of Grace's coat, her eyes half open. "Ranger," she breathed. The shepherd made his choice. He limped to her side and lowered himself beside her. Grace placed an oxygen mask gently over Lily's face. "Slow breaths," she said. "You are safe." Lily tried to inhale, but her chest barely moved. Grace checked her pulse. Her expression changed. "Lily, stay with me." Ethan dropped to his knees on the other side. Rainwater ran from his hair into his eyes. Ranger placed his muzzle against Lily's shoulder and remained perfectly still. Grace adjusted the mask and encouraged another breath. Nothing came. The road seemed to fall silent around them. Even the thunder had moved away. Ethan touched Lily's hand. "You told Ranger you could stay," he said softly. "He believed you." Ranger lifted his head and gave one quiet whine. Lily's fingers moved. Then her body drew in a shallow breath. A cough followed, weak but clear. Grace let out the air she had been holding. "There you are." Lily opened her eyes and turned toward the dog. Ranger rested his chin beside her hand. Behind them, the damaged truck settled deeper into the ditch with a long metallic sigh, but no one looked back. For that moment, the only thing that mattered was the small rise and fall of Lily's chest and the tired shepherd who had refused to leave before he saw it. The ambulance doors remained open while Grace Collins worked beneath the white interior lights. Rain whispered against the roof, softer now, and the forest beyond the road had faded into a wall of gray mist. Lily lay beneath a warm blanket with the oxygen mask resting over her face. Ranger had been lifted onto a padded stretcher beside her, but he refused to settle until his nose touched the edge of her blanket. Only then did his breathing begin to slow. Ethan stood just outside the ambulance, soaked through, his hands streaked with mud and soot. He watched Lily blink against the light. Her eyes were blue, clear for one moment, and clouded with exhaustion the next. Grace checked her pulse again. "You are doing well, Lily. We are going to take you somewhere warm." Lily turned her head toward Ranger. "He comes with me." Her voice was weak, but the words carried the certainty of a command. "He is coming," Grace said. "No one is leaving him." Ethan felt those words land somewhere he had kept guarded for years. No one is leaving him. It had been Ryan Miller who first said something like that during a winter training exercise in Virginia, when a young Marine had fallen behind during a 12-mile march. The rest of the unit had been tired, cold, and eager to reach shelter. Ryan had turned around without hesitation. "We finished together," he had said. Ethan had heard that sentence in different forms ever since, usually in dreams, sometimes in the silence before dawn. Grace looked at Ethan. "She keeps asking for you." Ethan stepped into the ambulance. The space smelled of antiseptic, wet canvas, and smoke carried in on their clothes. He sat on the narrow bench opposite Lily. Ranger opened one eye, studied him, then closed it again. Lily stared at Ethan as though she was searching through a memory. "What is your name?" she asked. "Ethan Walker." Her hand moved beneath the blanket. "Sergeant Walker?" The title froze him. "Staff Sergeant," he said slowly. Lily looked toward his chest. His field jacket hung open, and beneath it, the chain around his neck had slipped free. 2 worn dog tags rested against his shirt. She focused on them. "My dad had those." Ethan did not trust himself to answer immediately. Outside, Captain Harris spoke with a deputy near the damaged truck. Their voices were muffled by distance and rain. Inside the ambulance, the silence felt close and sacred. "Your last name is Miller," Ethan said. Lily nodded. "My dad was Corporal Ryan Miller." Ethan lowered his eyes. The years between that name and this moment collapsed without warning. He saw Ryan laughing over a cup of terrible coffee. Ryan singing off-key in the back of a transport. Ryan placing one hand on Ethan's shoulder before a mission and saying, "If anything happens, you keep moving." Ethan had kept moving. He had simply never decided where to go. Lily reached slowly toward the pocket of her sweatshirt. Grace started to stop her, but Lily shook her head. "I need to show him." She pulled out a small metal object wrapped in a piece of cloth. The edges were dark from smoke, but the shape remained clear. Half of a Marine Corps Challenge coin. A jagged cut ran down one side, as if the coin had been deliberately divided. Ethan stared at it. His hand moved to the back pocket of his jeans before he was aware of the motion. His wallet was damp, the leather softened by rain. Inside, behind his identification card, rested the other half. He had carried it for 6 years. Ryan had split the coin during their final week together, using a tool from the maintenance bay, while Ethan laughed and told him he was ruining a perfectly good keepsake. Ryan had handed him one half. "We match them again when we are both home," he had said. Ethan placed his piece in Lily's palm. The broken edges met. The emblem became whole. Lily watched his face carefully. "He said you would know." Ethan could barely form the question. "When did he give this to you?" "Before his last deployment. I was little. Mom kept it for me." She swallowed and looked at Ranger. "After she died, Aunt Claire found a letter with your name. She said we were going to find you." Ethan looked toward the wreck through the open ambulance doors. "Was your aunt driving?" Lily nodded. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. "She told me to stay with Ranger after the truck went off the road. She opened the back compartment and put me inside because the smoke was getting worse. Then she went to get help." Ethan felt the old ache return, joined by a new uncertainty. No one had found Claire near the truck. The rain could have erased her footprints, but it could not explain the open driver's door, the missing identification tag from Ranger's collar, or the blue backpack trapped inside the hidden compartment. "Lily," he said gently, "how did Ranger know where to find me?" She looked at him as if the answer was simple. "Dad taught him." Ethan glanced at the shepherd. Ranger's amber eyes were open again. "Ryan trained Ranger?" "He started when Ranger was a puppy. Mom said Dad wanted him to protect us if he could not come home." Lily closed her fingers around the restored coin. "Before we left this morning, Aunt Claire gave Ranger one of Dad's old shirts and your letter. She let him smell both." Ethan remembered the dog standing in the center of the road, watching his truck disappear into the rain. Not begging, identifying. "How could he know my truck?" Ethan asked. Lily lifted one shoulder weakly. "He did not know the truck." Her eyes settled on the dog tags hanging against Ethan's chest. "He knew you." Ethan turned toward Ranger. The shepherd held his gaze with the same exhausted steadiness he had shown beside the wreck. Lily reached across the narrow space and touched Ethan's hand. "My dad said you would come if Ranger found you." Ethan looked down at the joined halves of the coin. Outside, an emergency worker called for Captain Harris. Somewhere beyond the mist, another siren approached. Ethan closed his hand gently around Lily's. "Your father was right," he said. But as Ranger lifted his head toward the road, ears suddenly alert, Ethan realized the dog was still listening for someone who had not yet been found. Ranger's ears stayed fixed on the rain-dark road. His body tensed despite the bandage around his paw. Ethan followed his gaze. Beyond the ambulance, a second rescue vehicle moved slowly through the fog, its headlights sweeping across the trees. A deputy stepped into the road and waved it forward. Behind the vehicle walked 2 search volunteers beneath orange rain jackets, supporting a woman wrapped in a gray blanket. Lily saw her first. Aunt Claire. The name left her in a breath. Grace turned toward the open doors. The woman lifted her head at the sound. She was pale from cold and exhaustion, with wet brown hair clinging to her face, but she was walking. The moment she saw Lily, her knees nearly gave way. The volunteers steadied her and led her toward the ambulance. She made it about a mile down the old logging trail, the deputy explained. Her phone had no signal. She found an abandoned ranger station and waited there after the storm got worse. Claire reached the doors and placed one trembling hand over her mouth. Lily. Grace helped her inside. Claire gathered the child carefully, mindful of the oxygen line and blankets, and pressed her forehead against Lily's. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Ranger watched from his stretcher. Only when Claire reached down and touched the fur between his ears did he finally let his head rest. "You stayed," she whispered. "Of course you stayed." Ethan stepped back to give them room, but Claire looked up at him. Her eyes moved from his face to the dog tags against his shirt. "Ethan Walker?" He nodded. Claire closed her eyes briefly, as if a burden she had carried for years had finally reached the ground. "Ryan said Ranger would know you." She reached toward the damaged collar around the shepherd's neck. "There is something inside." Grace loosened the buckle and carefully lifted the collar free. Beneath the scorched outer layer, a narrow section of fabric had been sewn shut by hand. The stitching was old but strong. Claire pointed to it. "Ryan made that pocket before his last deployment. He told us not to open it unless Ranger brought us to you." Ethan took the small medical scissors Grace offered and cut through the thread. Inside was a folded photograph sealed in clear plastic, a worn training card, and a letter no larger than his palm. The photograph showed two young Marines standing beside a German Shepherd puppy with paws too large for his body. Ethan recognized himself first. He was 29, sunburned, smiling without restraint. Beside him stood Ryan Miller, one hand resting on the puppy's head. Ethan had forgotten the day entirely. "That was Ranger?" he asked. Claire nodded. Ryan started training him during a stateside assignment. He said the dog had an unusual memory for scent. Ethan unfolded the training card. Across the top, Ryan had written Ranger's name, age, and command responses. Beneath them was a line in darker ink. "Primary family guardian. Emergency scent transfer approved." Ethan stared at the words. Claire explained quietly. Ryan trained Ranger to locate a person from paired scent articles. One item from the person he needed to protect. One from the person he needed to find. She looked toward Lily. "This morning, before we left, I gave Ranger Ryan's old shirt, your unanswered letter, and the envelope from the memorial committee with your address. I thought we would reach you together." Ethan remembered the white envelope in his own truck. He had believed he was driving toward the past. In truth, the past had already begun searching for him. He opened Ryan's letter. The paper had softened along the folds, but the handwriting remained firm. Ethan read silently at first. Ryan wrote that no soldier could promise to come home, but every soldier could decide what love should do if he did not. He wrote that Lily deserved a life larger than grief. He wrote that Ranger had been taught to stay with her, to guide her, and if every other path failed, to find the one man Ryan trusted to understand what it meant to finish another Marine's watch. Near the bottom, one sentence stopped Ethan. "Do not let her grow up believing she was left behind." The ambulance seemed to grow quieter around him. Even the rain had softened to a faint tapping on the roof. Ethan read the final lines. "Ranger may find you before you are ready. That has never stopped him before. Trust the dog. Trust the girl. Then decide what kind of man came home." Ethan lowered the letter. For 6 years, he had treated survival like a punishment. Ryan had seen it as a responsibility. Ranger shifted on the stretcher and opened his eyes. The shepherd looked first at Lily, then at Ethan, measuring the distance between them. Ethan knelt beside him. "You carried that order all this time." Ranger lifted his nose and touched Ethan's wrist. It was not surrender. It was recognition. Claire wiped rain from her face and looked toward the joined challenge coin in Lily's hand. "Ryan never asked you to replace him," she said. "He only asked you not to disappear." Ethan looked at Lily. She was tired, frightened, and alive. Her fingers remained wrapped around both halves of the coin. Outside, Captain Harris called that the road was clear for transport. Grace began securing the blankets. Ethan folded Ryan's letter and placed it carefully inside his shirt, beside the dog tags. Ranger watched him do it. Then, for the first time since Ethan had seen him standing in the rain, the dog closed his eyes without fear that someone would be forgotten. 3 weeks later, the rain had given way to a clear October morning, and the mountains outside Asheville stood sharp against a pale blue sky. Ethan waited near the entrance of the small veterans' cemetery with his dress uniform folded over one arm. He had not worn it. Not yet. For now, he wore a dark jacket, polished boots, and the same dog tags that had rested against his chest through every mile of the road that brought him here. In his pocket was Ryan's letter. In his wallet were 2 halves of a challenge coin, pressed together inside a clear sleeve so they could no longer drift apart. A white medical van turned into the gravel lot and stopped beneath a red maple tree. Claire stepped out first. She moved carefully, still recovering from the long walk through the storm, but there was color in her face again. Lily followed in a navy coat with a red scarf wrapped around her neck. The small mitten Ethan had found beside the truck was tucked into her pocket. Ranger came last. The burned patch along his shoulder had begun to heal, though the fur there would always grow thinner. His front paw remained wrapped in a light support bandage, and he walked with a quiet limp. Still, his ears were high. His eyes were clear. When he saw Ethan, his pace changed. Not faster, more certain. Ethan lowered himself to one knee. Ranger crossed the final few feet and placed his head against Ethan's chest, directly over the letter hidden inside the jacket. Ethan rested, one hand along the dog's neck. "Good to see you too," he said. Lily stopped beside them. She studied the rows of white markers stretching across the hillside. "I have never been here before." Ethan stood. "Neither have I." Claire looked at him, but there was no judgment in her expression, only understanding. Some places took years to reach, even when the road was open. They walked together toward Ryan's marker. Fallen leaves moved across the grass in small circles, carried by a breeze that smelled of pine and distant with smoke. Ranger stayed beside Lily, matching his slower steps to hers. At the marker, Ethan stopped. Corporal Ryan Miller's name was carved beneath the Marine Corps emblem. The dates below it were simple, too simple for a life that had shaped so many others. Lily knelt and placed a small drawing against the stone. It showed Ryan in uniform, Ranger sitting beside him, and Ethan standing on the other side. Above them, she had drawn the same yellow sun from the water-damaged coloring book. Ethan removed the repaired challenge coin from his wallet and placed it on the top edge of the marker. Lily touched the joined seam. "It looks different now." "It is different," Ethan said, "but it is whole." Claire stepped back to give them space. Ethan unfolded Ryan's letter. He had read it many times since the rescue, but the final lines still made him pause. "Ranger may find you before you are ready. Trust the dog. Trust the girl. Then decide what kind of man came home." Ethan looked at Ryan's name and spoke quietly. "I spent 6 years thinking I had to earn the life you saved. I do not think that was what you wanted." The wind moved through the trees. Ranger sat between Ethan and Lily, his posture calm. No command had been given. None was needed. "You wanted me to show up," Ethan continued. "I should have understood that sooner." Lily reached for his hand. Her fingers were small and warm. Ethan closed his hand around hers. He did not promise that grief would disappear. He did not promise that every day ahead would be easy. He simply stayed. In the months that followed, staying became a series of ordinary acts. Ethan drove Lily to her first counseling appointment and waited in the lobby with Ranger asleep across his boots. He repaired the loose railing outside Claire's house. He attended Lily's school presentation about service animals and sat in the last row while Ranger wore a blue vest she had helped choose. He learned that Lily disliked peas, loved astronomy, and became quiet whenever thunder rolled across the mountains. On those nights, Ranger slept outside her door, and Ethan sat nearby with the hallway light on until the storm passed. Ranger healed slowly. The veterinarian cleared him for gentle walks, then longer ones. His limp never vanished completely, but neither did his patience. He no longer searched every room before resting. He no longer woke at each passing car. Little by little, the old order inside him softened. One evening in early spring, Ethan, Lily, and Ranger walked along a trail above the Blue Ridge Parkway. The sky glowed gold behind the hills. Lily ran ahead to a wooden overlook, then turned and called for them. Ethan gave a low whistle. Ranger started forward, but after 2 steps, he stopped and looked back. For years, he had always checked behind him, always counted who remained, always made certain no one had been left in the dark. This time, Ethan stood there. Claire waited near the trailhead below. Lily was laughing in the sunlight ahead. Everyone was accounted for. Ranger looked at Ethan one final moment. Ethan nodded. Go on. The shepherd turned and trotted toward Lily. She knelt and wrapped both arms around his neck. Ethan followed at an easy pace, listening to the wind move through the grass and the soft rhythm of Ranger's paws against the earth. No one announced that the mission was complete. No medal was given. No promise was spoken aloud. The dogs simply stopped standing guard behind them and began walking home at their side.